Hello, I'm Alexander White, and if you're interested in how to go from this drum sound into this drum sound, then hang around, because we're going to dig into exactly what I did to get that much bigger, fatter, wider, more mixed and complete drum sound. So first of all, let's just have a very quick look at my session. So we've got quite a number of tracks, but the exciting thing is all of this started off with just a mono overhead over my drum kit, just one microphone just positioned over the top. In last week's video, I actually did the recording where you can come and see how I actually put that together. So if you missed that, go and check it out because it just gives you a good foundation for what we're about to cover. So the original audio, let's just go back to this one. This is pretty much how I tracked it. I say pretty much because first thing I did with the track was, if we go to warps here, which is time stretching, fixing, basically what we've got is all of my drums. In fact, if I enlarge this, you can really see, have been timed. I just put them pretty much perfectly on the grid. This is something that you need to look at from song to song. I wouldn't always recommend that you grid drums. It depends on the musical style. And sometimes it's good to do like a 50% or a 75% or something like that. It's about feel. You don't want to crush the drummer's feel. That's very important. So whilst it's great to grid drums, sometimes it's not so great depending on the genre. So that's the first thing I did, was I just went through and I just gridded up my drums so they're nice and in time. Now from then I will just mute that track and we're going to head back over to the mixer page, because this very first track in my mixer is a copy of that original audio. So let's just quickly explain the routing and how everything is actually heading over to our main out, our stereo 2-track out. So we've got the overheads, and the overheads are going straight out to the drum bus. And just here you can see they're heading straight out to the drum bus. The drum bus is here, which has a couple of plugins on, which we're going to cover a little bit later. And one send in this case. Again, we'll cover that in a bit. And then that just goes out to a drum sum, which again, I've put a couple of plugins on. And the drum sum is just really collecting everything, because I've got a drum crush track here, and that is being fed from the drum bus. So I've created a final bus called drum sum, which just collects everything to do with the drums, just so they're on that one fader. So the first thing we'll do is I'm going to switch off all of the bus processing, and I'm going to mute the drum crush. And I'm also going to mute the width, because that's something that the overheads are going to. So let's just have a quick listen to those overheads again, just on their own. All right, so fairly plain overhead recording actually could be really good for a very natural, organic kind of music, folk, jazz, anything that is a softer style. You could totally just mix that would, just as that, and just put a little bit of reverb on it or whatever, and it'd be a cool sound for certain genres. But here you can see we've turned it into something a bit more rock and roll, or a bit more hard hitting. So the first thing I actually did was, before I touched a plugin, I went and I loaded in our samples. So what I did in the last video was I took samples of the drum kit that I was playing. So I sat at the kit, played the part, and then I simply hit the snare drum a couple of times just to get a nice sample, and then I hit it lighter. And then I went to the rack tom, did the same, floor tom, all the drums. I even got a crash cymbal and a few hi-hats just in case. I think on this all I've done is use the core kick, snare, rack tom and floor tom samples. The rack tom and the floor tom samples are kind of, the rack tom hardly plays. It plays 2 hits at the end of the piece. The floor tom plays a couple of times at the end, and then once kind of in the middle. So I manually put these samples in. Now, the reason I did this is because I think it's helpful to see how this can be done manually. There are plugins out there that will help you do it. There are even plugins that will use machine learning to separate out the individual hits in a stereo track. And they're pretty good. They get it wrong occasionally, but on the whole, they're really decent. But you know what? They cost money and you might not have access to them or time to learn. This is really fast because all you do is you make a new track and you listen to your overheads, and every single time, for example, as you can see a kick plays, you just put a sample on the new track. So let's just go and quickly listen to what this kick sample, for example, sounds like. So this is, let's go and make sure that there's no processing happening anywhere on that. No, I think it's good. This is just the raw kick sample on its own. Nice and simple. We'll check out the plugins in a second. But one thing I want to talk about is phase aligning. So this is quite an important aspect of doing any sort of drum work. Is if we zoom in on this is a really good example. When I added the sample in, now the good news is because we captured the sample, I left the microphone in exactly the same position on the drum kit. So when I played my kick drum, in the actual part I recorded, I knew that when I recorded a sample, it was going to be absolutely phase accurate. And the only key was in making certain that it matched up. So we're fairly zoomed in here, and this is reasonably clear. What you've got is these crests and troughs of the waveform. And you can see that what I've done is just made sure that when my kick drum waveform is going down, it's going down. When it's going up, it's going up. This is just a really easy, simple way of making sure this works. It should be pretty much the same sound. As you can see, this at the top here is the track that I actually played. This is the overhead track with all the hi-hats playing at the same time. It's probably got some snaring from the previous snare hit. Maybe there's a bit of a crash bleeding over the top. But because the kick drum is the loudest thing, you can see it's pretty much the same waveform, even though these are 2 different drum beats, which is the brilliant benefit of playing your samples and leaving that microphone exactly where it is, rather than getting the microphone, moving it and putting it into the front of the kick drum, or then moving it to the snare or something like that. So that's really, really cool. That's how to make sure your samples are phase aligned. And then all you do is you literally put them in place every time. You just go and listen, and you just place them all against your original drum sound. So what I think would be cool is just to hear, with no processing, mute that, make sure those are muted, mute the tom verb, which we'll be coming back to in a little while. Okay, so let's have a listen to what it sounds like with just the samples. So let's see how. Okay, so this is it without the samples first of all. Okay, and here it is with the samples added. Okay, so at this point it's not a massive difference, and it's quite subtle. What I've done is I've blended them so they are helping us get more access to those kicks and snares. So we, and by access, what I mean is when you're listening to the overhead, you've mostly got cymbals, and then the drums are there and they're clear, but in the course of a mix, you're going to slowly lose them, and you're just going to get some cymbal wash once you've added compression and all the processing that you do. So it's nice to have access to that kick and snare so you can raise them up a little bit if you need to. And that's where we're at. So one more time. Without. With. So immediately we've made a natural kit just sound a little bit more together. What's nice is because they're blended, you still get my groove, the way that I'm performing, how hard I'm hitting the snare. In the overheads, the volume changes, the texture changes. They are melding with the sample, so you don't have an inorganic, robotic sort of sound. You might want that, you might want to go for that, but you may not. You may want a natural kit sound. This is a great starting point. So, the next thing that I did was make the samples sound actually a little bit more like cannons, because if I've gone for more of a rock kit setup here, and I want those kicks and snares and toms to go doo 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 doom bang boom. That's the kind of thing that I want to do. So on the kick, let's just listen to what I did just on the kick processing wise. So I'll switch them off first so we can just have a listen. Okay, there's the kick. Now let's have a listen with the processing on. Let me solo it. Okay, processing off. Processing on. Can you hear that weight and that click? We've classic kick drum sound. Lots of weight at the bottom, clicky air on the top, mid-range scooped out. Let me show you what's actually happening. So I love the 1073 style EQs. It doesn't matter that it's a 1073, you can use any EQ you want. I use this because I use it all the time, so I'm really familiar with it. And when I say familiar with it, I don't mean I know what the controls do. I know what the controls do on every single EQ. But there is an innate connection that you develop when you work with one plugin a lot, where you just have a natural feel for where that control needs to go. I use the Neve 1073 preamp all the time for recording because I pretty much know where to set it for vocals. If I think I've got a loud vocalist, I roughly know where to turn the gain to. You know, there's no hunting out for things, it's just bang, bang, done. Same with the EQ. I know what these EQs are going to do. I know the shape of them. I know the points at which I start to get the tones that I like. And the interaction between the, say, the low pass filter, or the high pass filter, sorry, and the low end control. I know how those are going to interact because I've used it so much. So there's a heck of a lot in sticking to one EQ and really getting to know that EQ like so detailed. Of course, this doesn't do those really detailed notch filters or anything like that, those really narrow band kind of EQ repair stuff. And there are, you know, the plugins out there that are good for that. You've got FabFilter's Pro Q line, which are brilliant for that narrow stuff. But this is all about tone and character. So that's why I've used this and why it's not actually important to get the sound. Please don't run out and start buying 1073 plugins because you think you have to have one to make a good sound. You don't. Just, you know, buy one if you like it. If you like the look of it, great. So with the 1073, I've boosted a little bit of top end. So let me just mute the second plugin in the line so we can really hear what's happening with just the 1073. Okay, and this is 1073 off. 1073 on. All right, so you can see at 360 hertz, I've dropped it back by quite a lot. That really is, that might be like 8 or 10 decibels. That's a big old cut. Then I've boosted quite a lot at 60. Because the microphone was quite far away, and because it was kind of off axis to the kick drum, it was over the top of the kick drum, it wasn't in front of the heads, we lacked a little bit of low end. So I just fixed it. I just turned up some 60 hertz. And then to compensate for that ultra subby stuff, I've just done a high pass filter at 50 hertz. So that's pretty much all that's going on in this one. I didn't adjust the line gain or anything like that to add any extra drive. The more you turn this up, the more drive you get from the plugin. Didn't need to do that. So the second plugin in line is just a sample. So let me show you what this sample's doing. Now that's quite quiet. You may need to turn up your speakers for a sec just to really hear it. It's just a subby thump, because I just, again, wanted more of a sub-thump kind of character to it. With everything. Without it. With it. Can you hear how there's a really subtle low end warmth? This is definitely the only kind of thing you're going to hear on either full range kind of studio or great home hi-fi speakers or headphones. You're not going to hear this on laptop speakers. It just rounds out the bottom, and that's all I was looking for. I just wanted the low end of the kick drum rounded out a little bit. So, moving on to the snare drum. Let's go and have a listen to a snare drum. Let's find a nice spot for some snare drum. Here we go. So here's a snare. Super short sound. And that is just the natural snare sound, so there's nothing extra happening there. Okay. So the first thing I did on the snare was, would you look, it's a low boost. Again, because the microphone is far away, I wanted to capture the proximity effect that you get when you put a microphone close to a snare drum. So let's just have a little A-B between these two. Can you hear how it's warming up? Tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. Really, really small amounts. And that's really all I did. I just rolled off some of the... I high-passed it at 80 Hertz. And then just gave it that little bit of a boost at 110 because I just wanted a little bit... I wanted to balance the low end. I wasn't trying to make it sound... kind of like I did on the kick drum, where I really brought a lot of the thunder on the kick drum. I didn't want that. I just wanted the natural snare, but a little more. So then the next thing that happened was the sample. And let's do, again, an A and B with the sample. So that one's a little bit more obvious in solo. Here it is without. And here it is with. It's probably fairly obvious what I was trying to achieve with this sample. I wanted more length to the snare. The snare that I had an O-ring on it. It was quite a dry sound, so it just goes cut, cut, like that. And it's kind of a lot of transient and not a lot of body. I just wanted to fill it out a little bit. This is something that I know will work really well in a mix. When you're trying to fight your drums through walls of guitars, vocals, backing vocals, keyboards, everything, you need a little bit of body to the snare. And that's all that I've given it here. So here it is again. So let's play the kick and the snare together. So let's just hop out to our mix page here. Let's just go straight back to the start. So this is kick and snare together with processing. Okay, without processing. Okay, cool. So the next thing that's happening to the snare is a little bit of snare reverb. Let's have a listen to just the snare with the reverb on. And muted. Again, it's all about getting some more length, some more body to sound like it's in a big space. Big rock drum room is the vibe that I was going for. The snare reverb is simply just an EMT plate reverb, and I haven't really done any filtering on this one. I've left it quite long. This might just be the default patch. I'm pretty sure I did just leave it at default, and it worked. And that's the wonderful thing. Sometimes you just put a reverb plugin on, and you put a distortion plugin on, and the default settings are great. You know, the manufacturers that make plugins don't make don't often make default literally flat. They often make default something a little bit fancy when it comes to something like reverbs, because they want you to hear the reverb in a cool way straight away. So don't always dismiss the default settings. All right, so let's now have a listen to what we have with our overheads and kick processing. Okay, so this is our original overheads with the kick and snare. Without the kick and snare. And with. Honestly, for a lot of styles, for a lot of music, you could stop there and start to record the other instruments, bring them all in, get them set up, or, you know, just get on with your mix, because that's already a pretty cool sound. It already sounds nice and kind of thumping and cool. So, obviously I didn't stop there. I went a lot of steps further. I'm going to come back to this width one, because that's a cool extra. You can probably guess what's happening, but we'll come back to that. Let's move on to the rack tom and floor tom. So let's go to somewhere where we've got a couple of toms, which is at the end here. So here it is. Okay, so this is with. And you can immediately straight away hear the contribution. Let's put the EQs in. Without the EQs. With the EQs. You know, you can probably tell that I'm not doing anything incredibly extreme. It's just balancing, bringing them up to just a little bit tougher. Let's solo these two drums now. And again, listen here. With EQ. Okay, I mean, you can really hear the improvement, especially on the floor tom. So let's quickly go and look at what we did. The rack tom is just a high-pass filter at 80 Hertz. Quite a lot of 110. No mid-range change, and a little bit of that stick-click business at the top. And with the floor tom, tons of 60 Hertz. Because the mic was further away, I felt that we just didn't really have the right kind of low end from that floor tom. So tons of that. Again, I'm filtering out, so I'm boosting a lot, and then I'm filtering out that super low end for things that I don't want. Now, it's interesting because you look at the fact that I've boosted 60 here, but down here I've high passed at 80. So it's kind of reasonable to go, well, aren't you boosting and then immediately cutting? Well, the thing is with these EQs, they're not perfect. You don't literally have it go 280 and then everything just shaves off. It doesn't work like that. It's a roll off. And the 60 Hertz boost affects it way higher in the frequency range as well. So it's not like just you get to 60 and it goes up and then everything after 60 is flat. It doesn't work like that. It's a big load. So what the shape you end up creating is you boost at 60 Hertz, the 60 Hertz raises up, and then you're just bringing down that super, you're kind of then just kind of, rather than it being a big massive mound like this, you're then just bringing the edge of it down a little bit like that, because they work in a complementary kind of a way. So let's just listen to the floor tom without EQ. With EQ. Okay, and let's do the high tom. With EQ. Without EQ. Okay, and you know what? That one picked up a little bit of level because we had so much boost, so it's also a little bit louder. Tom reverb is next, so let's have a listen to the tom reverb. See if I even bothered to change the plate which I used. Oh, cannons. Hello, cannons. So yeah, that's what's got on here. I did actually change it. I changed it to the, I think this is going to be a really cool way to show you, is I'm going to just change A and B plates have a quick listen to what A, B and C sound like. This is A, B, C. Not only is C, even though it's the same time, it's a bigger reverb, but it's also got more bass. Again, these toms, I wanted them to have presence at the low end. I wanted them to be cannons. So there we go. That's the toms done. So let's have a listen to just a little bit of that end section and just see how far we've come with everything so far in. Cool, that's quite fun. So let's continue on. Let's come back to this width control now. So let's solo this up and unmute this width control and just have a listen to the original drums with the width on. Width off. Width on. Again, this is a subtle one, but it just widens up the drums. Let me show you what it sounds like in solo. I've just spreaded them out. I've just stretched the drum sound so it sounds wider and it sounds more fun. Width sounds really cool, but you don't always need to do stereo to get a cool width sound in your mix. I would say almost you're not trying to use this sort of technique as a replacement for stereo. It's just a different kind of thing. So here's what I did on the delay. It is obviously a completely fully wet delay, so there's no dry signal in the delay. There's literally nothing switched on except some EQ, which is cutting at 80 Hertz and cutting at 9.16 kilohertz. Cool. And then this is the really important bit, the delay times. One side is 5 milliseconds, the other side is 20 milliseconds delay. Really tiny delays. Okay, so that's where things are at there. So that's what the width is for, just spreading out those overheads. So then we have our drum bus. I think we've completed all of our channel processing, so now we have the drum bus. And on the drum bus, I've put an Ocean Way. Room simulator, emulator, big Ocean Way Studios. Pretend like we're all at Ocean Way Studios. Who doesn't want to be at Ocean Way Studios? So let's have a listen to what that sounds like with everything. Off. On. You can see what this is doing. It's taking our drum kit from being stood right in front of the drum kit going hello to the drummer to moving them all the way back into the room. So now you're stood in front of the band. You're stood watching this rock group about to play. And it just gives distance, space, a sense of realism, a sense of impact, because that tells us it's in a big space. And that makes us immediately go, well, these drums are big then. So next up is an 1176, just hitting some drums fairly hard. Without the 1176. With. Yeah, I mean, it's an 1176. It instantly adds excitement and joy and pleasure to everything. Now, here's something that I think is important. You'll notice the reverb is before the compressor. Why is a reverb before a compressor? The thing is it doesn't matter. There is no correct order for plugins. You don't have to put a reverb before or after a compressor, or you don't have to put a reverb on a bus. It doesn't matter. The question isn't where should you put the plugin. The question is, why are you putting the plugin where you're putting it and what you're trying to achieve by putting it there? Now, what I want to achieve is I want to compress the drum room alongside the drums. I want the interaction. I don't want things to be all isolated and on their own and not interacting with each other. It's that interaction which makes a mix sound glued and exciting and fun. It is the way the compressors all push and pull against all of the different sources that are sometimes running through to one compressor. I love the idea that, in a big room, you record a sound, and then if you are in a big room with a natural reverb, everything after that is going to be a reverb before an everything. It's going to be a reverb before a preamp, a reverb before a compressor, a reverb before an EQ, because you've captured natural reverb in a big room. So I love putting reverbs before compressors. I actually love the way that it softens the release times and the way the compressor hits and reacts. Because you have some information there, even though it's a small bit of reverb, helps the compressor not quite sound so brittle and harsh, which compressors can do on very dry sources. So that's why the compressor's after the reverb in this case. So let's listen again. Off. Especially listen to the snare. Off. Cool. 1176s on drums. Super fun. Then we've got super fun processing. This is distortion. Emulating a Proco Rat distortion pedal, made famous by guitarists. I'll show you what this sounds like in solo. Just adding a bit of grit and grime and really steady level. This is coming out of the drum bus, so this is being hit after all of this processing has happened. So this is receiving kind of like a complete drum sound. Let's have a listen to it in with the drums and without. Without. With. It's a super subtle one, but it just adds that tiny little bit of crunch, that tiny little bit of steadiness to the drums, a little bit of glue. So I could have stopped there, but I didn't, because we're having fun and this is great. So I went on and did some EQ to the drums. And this is subtle. I just wanted to clear up still some of that low-end stuff, the whatever nonsense happens below, 50 hertz. So that's been taken out. Tiny little bit of body again, because, that's probably like a decibel. But it's just a tweak in the right direction. It's very subtle at this point. And again, just a little bit of tiny air on this 12 kilohertz band. You're going to struggle to hear the difference with this one. It's really subtle, but here it is off. And here it is on. Something else that I did on this plugin as well, which I think contributes to the sound, is, I mentioned as you turn this up, you get more crunchiness, you get more drive. Well, I've actually turned it up 2 notches up to 10. And then I've compensated by turning the fader down by 10. So the volume sounds relatively the same, but you can hear how the drums just sound, again, just a little bit bigger, a little bit more serious. Off. In fact, actually, I think you can hear this even more clearly than I thought you could. It really does just glue the drums together even more, settles them into a more uniform, in a good way, kind of sound. Off. And then, after that, we went for some compression with a Fairchild. Let's just have a quick listen to what this one's doing. This one is really genuinely is actually subtle. And this is nothing more than just that final little bit of, hey, just stay stable. Don't do anything nutty. Let's listen to the end where the toms hit and see what this one does when the toms come in. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really even move that much with the toms because things are already pretty steady with the 1176. This will be a lot of just tone and texture because this plugin emulates all the transformers and all the circuitry of the real Fairchild, which has something nutty like 18 tubes in it or something like that, you know. It's an amazing plugin, full of tone and texture, but that's all that's there for. And that pretty much concludes our tour of how to go from this to this. And you can imagine that working so well in a rock mix. Of course, there'd be probably even more tweaks and processes that would happen when you bring in the bass and the guitars, but they'd be subtle. You know, largely this would be the direction that I'd be heading. With a full mix, you'd also do things like a mix bus compression or a parallel mix bus compression. So not only are the drums interacting with themselves in this, with all those compressors in the various points, but you'd also go further and have instruments interacting with these drums. So the other instruments would then push the drums around as well. And that's what creates this ebb and flow and excitement in a mix and the sense that everything is one cohesive whole. So I really hope you've had a good time. If you have, please hit the like and subscribe button because it means so much and it helps out so much. I love making these videos for you, and I'd love to be able to continue to make those videos. So please let me know in the comments if you've got any questions or any thoughts at all. I love to hear from you. Again, thank you so much for watching. As a reminder, if you didn't see the first video in this like little mini 2-part thing, please go and double check last week's video out because it just gives you the foundation of what I did to record those drums. And I hope it's given you some tools and workflow and ideas on how, if you only have one microphone to capture some drums, you can actually turn them into something really cool and something that sounds like used a lot more microphones than just one. Thank you so much for watching. And oh, one final thing, the raw samples that I recorded I will be releasing. So the link will be in the description. I don't think it'll be in straight away, but keep your eye on the video because I'll pop that in a few days, and then you'll be able to go to my website and just download them and just have some raw little organic overhead samples to use in your productions. So thank you so much, and catch up with you very soon.